Since I'm going to talk about it again, I want to give you another attempted way to picture what I'm talking about. My version of the great old human nervous system. And picture the brain itself, this time, as like a kind of restless, silent, oceanic sphere. Either the whole thing or up where it seems to be the level of consciousness, but like the good old time back in the book of Genesis, like the little oceanic before there was much of anything, the wet brain, silent but always in motion. God knows what's going on in there. And around it now is this thin, as a matter of fact, electrically charged, but it's a thin, charged atmosphere. And that is the dry brain. Think about it that way. It's just not unlike the atmosphere on this planet, vis-a-vis its size and its relationship to our solar system and the universe. Just a thin, charged field that makes up a kind of atmosphere around the wet brain. Some more descriptions having to do with the way things are beyond verbal 3 dimensions, but at least giving you maps of a verbal kind heretofore not available. One of them tonight goes like this. The dry brain, part of its purpose here, part of its operation is that it is treating the wet brain somewhat as though it is a crude, uncouth, illiterate relative. But there's more. And it continually is attempting to explain its behavior, but having to make it up as it goes along. Now think about it. There is some validity, or I would not draw out this picturization. Think, if you have to for a second, which is all right. To think for a second? No, specifically about this for a second. If it were actually 2 different people and you had, for whatever reason, this one fairly glib, hip, sophisticated cosmopolitan who is chained by this bucolic wouldn't cover it, illiterate, crude, uncouth, from down on the farm relative. And he can't get away from him. But now that he is in polite company, he has to continually attempt to explain the uncouth behavior of this relative that is always chained to him. But there is no sort of preconditioning, there is no sort of education, no one is prepared to do this. You simply turn around and you find yourself chained to this relative, and everyone is already generally wired up to want to explain this uncivilized, unusual, unexpected behavior. But it goes like this. One of the important parts of my first sentence to you is the dry brain is having to make it up on the run, so to speak. And there's even more. It not only is having to make it up, just as though it was standing here and just ad-libbing, just having to say almost anything that came to its mind about what's going on. Now that is, you got to admit, pushy, perhaps even stressful enough to poor little old dry brain. But more than that, its energy comes from this uncouth relative. That is, the very thing it's chained to, that it is having to do a non-stop, on the run, ad hoc, attempted explanation of its behavior itself, through the handcuffing, is the source of energy. Do you follow the trickiness of this? Even three-dimensionally it's tricky, but it's even more tricky than that. But it is having to make it up as it goes along. Now, if any of you begin to get a proper feel for that, you might even care to expand that, or it may just suddenly strike you that it needs to be expanded into a field having more to do with your entire life. People would not be inclined to want to think about themselves that way. But do any of you get just a glimpse, if I say it again right quick and tell everybody just look real quick and then look off and forget about it, that it is almost the very thing that seems to be you. It's like you've been having to make it up as you go along. But not in the sense of you sitting around after some heartbreak, some disappointment, and sitting there sipping on gin and trying to look back over your life. Not that kind of reflection. I'm talking about right this second and every second. It's as though you're having to make up and explain what's going on, except you never knew what it was. Now people think, well, I'm trying to explain myself, or I'm trying to make myself better understood, or I'm trying to make sure, I want to clarify my behavior. I saw people raise their eyebrows at what I did. And there seems to be specific circumstances motivating people to say something about their behavior. What if it's not specific circumstance? What if it is a lifetime proposition of this dry brain, as I'm calling it, of having to attempt a running? You understand, it's running. The wet brain, if you don't like, or for a second, if you want to change it, I don't know why you wouldn't like it, from the oceanic restless sphere, how about this train? And the time you reach what on this planet they laughingly refer to as state of consciousness, 3 or 4 or 5 years old, and of course I know some of you, it was 12 or 14, but it is like the day you became conscious. The wet brain was then like a train, and that you were handcuffed to it and you had to run. You don't know why, you didn't think about it, but everybody understands I got to run or I'd go crazy. You can't explain it, you just know everybody else is running, everybody else is now little boys and girls, everybody else is talking, and you're just part of them. Just again kind of drop down into the human herd, and they're already on the hoof, already going, and when you hit the ground, you can't hesitate. As those good old Baptist hymns used to say, you can't stop, even lag behind. You understand it, you don't know why, but you have to hit the ground, to say the least. Fleet of foot. So, as soon as you become conscious, you realize I am tied to this crude, illiterate, uncouth train relative. And so there you are, running as fast as you can up here alongside this train. You're constantly explaining the behavior of the train. But you're making it up, so to speak, instantaneously, continually as you go along. Once you get your own glimpse of this, all ideas of people planning their life, not just behaviorally speaking, but people apparently having something to do with the construction of their intellect, of what they think. A lot of you already suspect this, you got a taste of it. To put it technically, it ain't true. You're making up your own brain. Notice I didn't say making up your own mind, because that's a figure of speech that is misleading. You're making up your own brain. You're making up you via these attempted explanations as you go along, instantaneously. I don't care that it may appear that you look back and you realize the story I was giving everybody last night about being a secret agent for the Internal Revenue Service, and actually I don't have to drive this pickup truck, it's just a cover because I have a Mercedes at home. That story didn't go real well, especially that girl who was driving the Beamer last night and kind of looked down her nose. I'll change the story next time. I know people go through that. But that does not belie the fact that right then you're running beside the train. Right then you're making up just to you. You don't need an audience. You're making up to you right then as you go along. Anytime that you go, well, let's see, what do I think now? Or what will I do next time? It sounds like you're planning, but you're not. You're still attempting to explain the behavior of this runaway train, of this uncouth relative, as you go along. You can't stop. You may physically be sitting there and apparently reflecting upon yesterday, this afternoon's intellectual activities, but you're not. You're still running beside the train. How about some EGs? Electrographophones. Examples. Dry brain, either to itself or amongst others, which is the same thing. It says such things as sociological circumstances have caused me to be as antisocial as I am. Now, what is it actually saying? Antisocial, of course, only being one. You could say shy, afraid of the opposite sex. Sociological conditions and circumstances have made me this way. That is, speaking for me and my cousin here, my relative, my train. Me as a whole. Circumstances have made me this way. What it is also saying is not genetics. That is, not my relative. Not this wet, uncivilized brain. It has not. It is further saying that the wet brain, that part of me that I'm trying to explain, is not actually responsible for what it does. It's not mean necessarily, it's not evil, it's just uncouth. It's unlettered, untutored, in worldly, verbal, social ways. Based upon this astounding response I'm getting from you here in person, and you out there on tape at some other time in some other place, we'll see. Then I'm going to have to point out to you that this is one of the non-specific laws of physics that has brought about this continuing apparent intellectual question between circumstance, environment, and genetics. That it's not just a delusion. It is not just that human intelligence got off on the wrong foot somewhere and has been stumbling along all this time saying, well, wait a minute. Is it circumstance in my environment or anybody's that makes people what they are, or is it their background, or is it some combination? And I have long ago answered that for you on this planet, in the 3D world. And enough of you now, I see you repeat it and it shows up, that you understand the environment to any one person, any individual's environment is everybody else's genetics. But it is not just that life let man's intellect and his perception go awry somewhere. Can you not see, if I attempt to get at it in this way, that part of this relationship between this charged magnetic field of an atmosphere, this thin layer that does the talking and is now continuing, like little lightning flashes and changes in the atmospheric pressure, changes in the charge itself, just scooting over this non-stop oceanic sphere that is the wet brain, that as it continually makes running on the run attempted explanations as to what's going on down there in this silent, restless sphere. It is continually saying, speaking for itself, which it tries to announce to itself and the world that I am speaking for all of me. But what it is saying is down at the point that my energy is derived, from whence it is derived. That is not in toto me. I am not driven by these silent genetic forces. I am driven by circumstance. That is what has shaped me. But do you not hear that that is an attempt to explain, it is an attempt to make up for the uncouth relative? Well, I'm sure glad I stopped and went back through that now. That all right, I'll try it another way, God damn it. At another taping, do you recall, I brought up for a different purpose. The example I started with that night was this piece of advertising that has been floating around the country now that banks are using, and you can hear it in different parts of the country, as they'll say the National Bank of Fructose, who realizes that money is not all there is to banking. And I was pointing out that night and asking you to consider yourself why things are so arranged energetically that many of life's man's institutions seem to have as their most public pronouncement a denial of what their purpose is, of banks saying that there's more to banking than money, which there's not. That's it. Or for our great armed forces here, that institution of our government, to have pictures of good old close-shaved head dunderheads, and it says the U.S. Army or the Romanian Army, where peace is our business, which is, it's a lie. It's a lie. I mean, if you want to call it anything a lie on this planet, no army is in the business of peace. The whole point of an army is war. But you do understand it seems to serve some sort of purpose. But that was not why I'm bringing it up again tonight. Institutions, operations that get verbalized in the life of man on this planet, continually pointing out funeral businesses, restaurants, gyms, all sorts of things continual in their advertising point out that such and such is our purpose, or conversely such and such is not our purpose, or it's not all it is, when it's exactly what it is. Or when they say this is our purpose, it is absolutely not. Normally the kind of examples I'm trying to get you to see, you can take in the three-dimensional world as quite easily and turn it around, and there's the purpose. Consider this. The dry brain is in charge of announcing purposes, proclaiming interest, that the wet brain does not harbor. Now you got to remember, in the description I'm giving you, the wet brain is the source of energy. The dry brain would not even be there. That's a fact. Regardless of the situation that contemporary biology and physiology does not use my descriptions, thank God. But you would not have a dry brain. You would not have consciousness. Your cortical intellect would just be a bunch of folded up goo up there if it were not for the lower, coming out of the brainstem, the older parts of the brain. So now you got to remember that. The dry brain is operating thanks to the wet brain. Remember that. The dry brain, back to, remember the example, there's more to banking than money, or the U.S. Army, peace is our business. The dry brain continues to announce to itself and to others, announce purposes and plans. And it seems to be speaking for this whole thing, but remember, the whole thing speaking is dependent upon the wet brain. That's where it's coming from. It's announcing plans, proclaiming interest it has, intentions, by God, intentions I have, that the wet brain does not feel whatsoever. does not harbor at all. Zilch. Think about it. If you thought something was funny or peculiar about banks, once I pointed out, saying there's more to banking than money. And I pointed out, well, there's not. That's all there is. That's it. And so what's up? That life has men in a magnified situation, that is, institutions, saying, da-da-da, da-da-da. You know, that over here is northeast. And you think, well, that's nice to know. When in fact they're pointing southwest. And you just never notice. And then you think, well, that's strange. It's not strange when you begin to realize, take it from the institution, take it down to the level inside of your own nervous system. Not because I say it, but because you begin to realize it through the operations of you and everyone else, that the thing talking continually throughout your life is announcing, my only interest, the only thing that keeps me going, by God, besides my beautiful wife and my 2 charming children, is my irresistible, irrepressible drive to go northeast. And the very thing that's absolutely inescapable, the source of energy that even makes a person say, to have the ability to say, my only intention in life is to go northeast. The thing, the wet brain, has no interest in going northeast. That does not mean that it has a disinterest. It does not mean that it's anti-northeast. But you are talking through the dry brain about plans, interests, intentions that the wet brain does not have. Furthermore, the dry brain continually denies the kind of things that the wet brain would more likely want to pursue. All right, if you don't see that, let me ask you this. Then what in the hell is being civilized? Besides not picking your nose in public and using the right fork, what being civilized is just what I told you. Is being wired in such a way that your dry brain continually denies, not only to other people, but to yourself. They're of equal importance, and then some. Denies the very things that the wet brain would more likely have an interest in pursuing. That's being civilized. Being civilized is being shocked. My God, how could somebody say that? How could somebody do that? What the world coming to? What do you think's going on? You think it's you? You this enlightened 199 pound to 200 pounds worth of molecules looking upon uncouth, unacceptable behavior in another person and saying, my God, it's too late. If the greenhouse effect don't get us, the crumbling of contemporary society will send us all right down the old crane commode. We're all done for. You think that's what it is? It's being civilized. What's really at hand is the molecular structure of the dry brain. This charged, thin atmosphere around this almost primeval oceanic stew. The dry part continually, and not having the least idea, continually denying. What it's saying is, oh no. Boy, we got no interest in that. What we want to do, in fact, if we ever get enough money saved up and get the little children raised and all, in fact, later I may get thee to a monastery. I may take myself to a nunnery. I may go away to India and contemplate and all that shit. What's it saying? It's saying just what I've told you. It's announcing plans and interest that the wet brain does not have. I'll say one more time. It's not that the wet brain goes, oh no, I don't like that. It's not that the wet brain says, well, I don't approve of some of that. The wet brain is simply not interested in it. It'd be like a fully civilized person, it'd be like their amount of interest in the soccer cup finals, since I used that last week. And anybody like soccer, don't write me. It was just obviously it wasn't even a joke. But it's the wet brain that just doesn't even hear it. To announce, well, what I'll do, I'll go ahead and work. And when I reach retirement age, if I've got enough saved up, a couple of mil, I'm about 50, I'll just retire and I'll go away and think great thoughts and read the great books. You know, I'll do something for myself. The wet brain, if I may play with the reality of it a second, if it in some way could hear and was aware, and the kind of examples I've tried to pull for you before, when it's not true, it sounds like it could be possible, but like talking to a dog. But if the wet brain could hear all this and you told it, your dry brain said, boy, if we can finally get through and not get ulcers and get stressed out completely and retire and get a little money and get the kids, you know, send my wife off to a fat farm or somewhere, we'll go off and we'll go out and we'll live under trees and we'll be around nice, neat people. We'll hang around gurus and live in caves, whatever it is. And you tell it the wet brain would do like a dog does when you say, do you think that we should include anybody else in that general classification of the classical period? Do you think it's actually covered just by Beethoven, Haydn, and Mozart? Does that do it? And your dog go, it's not that he disagrees. What does a dog know about? You know, are we going to jump? Could we jump directly from the Baroque to the Romantic era? Or could we include some of those from the later Baroque era into the classical era? Or who made up this false classification? And your dog goes, you know, none of it means anything. It's not that he has an opinion one way or the other. Just right there is the dry brain being civilized, talking to the wet, that is another part of you, that's not taking consideration about what we're going to do. But it all sounds fine. It sounds fine to yourself when you say it. My example or some other example. Find your own. And it sounds fine among civilized, worthy people to say, well, I plan someday to do so-and-so. I'd like to make a lot of money and then send the kids off and either go to a monastery or else then I'll just sell everything and give the money to charity. Or I'll go out and maybe I'll go off somewhere like to the Bermuda or the Romanian School of Medicine at the age of 55 and become a doctor and then go out and the rest of my life I'll be Albert Schweitzer revisited. All of this between people, civilized people, sounds fine. But the wet brain, if it could hear, is just nothing. It's not against it, it's just meaningless. So you have people wired up, living on the dry edge of this planet, continually making announcements of their intentions, what their interest, being passionate, saying, well, here's what I want to do in life, by God. I mean it. Serious about it. There's a part of them that's just, if it was listening, just meaningless. And on the other hand, there is a continual dry verbal denial that's implicit in saying I want to do good, which is to say, well, I'm not going to do bad. But what people classify in the civilized world as bad, may I suggest to you, if you hadn't already figured out, might be the very kinds of things that the wet brain might be more inclined to pursue if it were indeed given full rein. Not to go join a monastery. I'm suggesting to you, nay. You could even look upon the continuing dialogue that goes on in the nervous system. That which seems to be your own consciousness, somewhere between the rolling of the waves down there, the lapping of them, and they get to be bigger breakers. Between that, all the combinations, there being a certain calmness in the air, then it gets charged up, and there seems to be storms, and it seems to calm down a bit. But this internal dialogue, you could look upon it. Human consciousness, you could look upon it from one view as the dry brain attempting to, via talk, change the wet one. This goes on in everybody, and you've just never noticed it. And it manifests itself in behavior sometimes. But it's going on continually, so I'll try to make you see in a second, just in the dialogue. It seems to be your own private, at-home thought processes. But it reflects itself in behavior, such as this. I know it can be a physically enjoyable exercise, but how about the martial arts? It was very popular a few years ago, and probably some of you have seen this on tape. Maybe it's still popular. But think about those that, if there are people at those kung fu, karate studios right now that are actually doing it just for the exercise, then we'll discount them. But those that rather than just go out and run or go and beat up on a brick wall without having to pay somebody money to let them do it, the whole scenario of being involved with martial arts, I will go do it and I'll buy the little uniform and I'll learn all the stuff, and the guy tells you how to think, what to say to yourself. The pursuit of I'm going to study the martial arts, the particular wiring example I'm trying to point to is, in that case, you've got an individual's dry brain telling the wet brain that we are not cowards. It is, and you can't explain this. Forget now for a second you trying to latch on to conditions or my genetics. That is, your genetics. You find yourself that your internal dialogue, let us say, has always found you to be a coward or cowardly. Adverbs always seem to soften the blow a little bit. You seem to find yourself inclined to be less aggressive than some of your fellow men. And you've even had it pointed out to you back in grammar school or high school, and you couldn't deny it. And then sometime later in life, you decide to take up the martial arts. You go out and spend money. You go there. You and the people who go there together in the class, an instructor, I'm sure says something, or I've seen books that you're supposed to think a certain way, or they tell you that certain forms of it is not to teach you to hurt somebody else, but it's to keep someone else from hurting you, or something like that. And you read that and you go, yeah, that's it. I don't want to go around and beat up my fellow man, which if you're cowardly to start with, you do. But the dry brain, you say, well, I don't really want to beat up my fellow man. I just want to get in a position to where I'm not afraid, damn it, to where I don't always feel that. The study, I'm not going to stay here, either here or don't, I'll try to expand it in some other areas, but what I am, the particular example I'm talking about, the martial arts, for instance, or taking up boxing, or it could be taking up weightlifting, to where I can just get big and strong like, some guy is a heavy-duty weightlifter, professional wrestler. What it is the dry brain saying we are not cowardly. We are not 98-pound weaklings that are going to be having sand kicked in our face the rest of our life. All forms, beyond what seems to be overt behavior, deriving therefrom, all forms of whistling in the dark. Does everybody know what that means? I've used it before and some people look blank. All forms of talking to yourself, all forms of encouraging yourself to be brave, to be strong, to be energetic. They sound fine. Religion seems to encourage it. Psychology seems to encourage it. All forms, all kinds of self-help books seems to encourage it. Right? You have to apparently engage in some alternative behavior, such as joining a martial arts school. You may have attempted after reading a book, or maybe you had a brother or an uncle said, hey, don't let people get you down. When somebody does what that guy did, you kind of made you embarrassed in there in the bar. Tell yourself this. Say, why should I stoop so low to this level? The guy'd probably beat me up anyway. But even if I could beat him up, what's the point? The guy was drunk. I just walked in to have a drink. What's the point in that? And the uncle that tells you that, he was about 6'5" and 300 pounds, and he could have whipped the guy. And he tells you, don't let it get you down. And so you either got it from him, you picked it up from a book, or you seem to have picked it up from the airways, and you tell yourself something like that. What's going on? I just told you what's going on. It's the dry brain attempting to change the wet brain through talk. How about all these sales seminars that are, from one viewpoint, as impotent, as meaningless as U.S. Army? Our only business is peace. All forms of these self-motivational classes, or how to make $1 million in your spare time, or whatever it is, and they got all kinds of ideas. And how to make money in real estate, or how to make money in doing home improvements by mail. I don't know what. And they have certainly their fair share. Life is wired up in such a way that they have their fair share of critics who say, hey, these things are some kind of rip-off. The guys that are teaching these courses are only making money off people like you. They don't make any money actually making money off real estate. We're pointing out continually that some of these guys lost their ass in the stock market. They're in chapter 11 right now, and they're still out giving seminars, and people still show up. But see, they don't get the point. They don't know how life is arranged. They don't know how. This charged atmosphere, the relationship between that and this oceanic, rather dark, quiet, in the verbal sense, world, they don't understand the relationship. These sales seminars, all kinds of motivational talks, books, and if you can see it, some of what passes as being inspirational messages from religions. It's what it is a reflection of the dry brain attempting to get the wet brain to change by talking. We got to turn the tape over. Before I move on to another possible paragraph along these lines, I'll repeat one more time. The talk that goes on, and it does not have to be as flamboyant as my example of enrolling in a martial arts course. The talk that goes on inside of you continually about any dream of, plan of, intention of change is based upon that same dynamic of the dry brain trying to whistle its way in the dark out of whatever the problem is. But it's not necessarily ever seen by ordinary intelligence as being a problem. They may be saying, well, I would be better off if I could make this change. I think it might be to my ultimate benefit. But it's all based upon a very, although unseen, but a very dramatic difference between what the wet brain is wired up, in the case I was using. It's a coward. When it is pressed upon by the apparent circumstances of life physically, it is, for all intents and purposes, wired up to run. It is also wired up that its dry brain disapproves of it. And so it's constantly talking to itself all the way from, what I should do is take up karate. God, I wish I had the time. God, I wish I was brave enough. I bet if I just go in there to a class, they'll laugh at me. God, I wish I could just make a wish and give all my money to the church and wake up tomorrow and I'd be 6'5" and weigh 300 pounds. God, I wish, maybe I'd just talk to myself. And so I'll just get one of those books of, or I'll get a tape, a subliminal tape, and I'll listen to it at night that says, you're a bad mother, you're a bad mother, you're a bad mother. Now I'll listen to it. All the way from all that kind of stuff to the person says what I should do instead of worrying about trying to fight my fellow man, because Goliaths are always going to be around. No matter how big you are as a David, there's always a Goliath. So what I should do, I should be more religious. I should try and love those who hate me. I should try and forgive them. They can't help it. Most of the people who are big and aggressive are dumb anyway. They didn't have the benefit of great education like me, although I'm still a coward, but I am an educated coward. So to try and explain away, or just to be upset continually. Do you hear that all it is, all of that, from one extreme to the other, there's no way out, is the dry brain talking to the wet and whistling in the dark. How about the one that I refer to, another kind of protocol of people, quote, telling what kind of guy they are. Everybody knows about that. As many times as I've used it and tried to discourage you and embarrass you and just tell you outright that you should never, even on this planet, although it's native behavior here, you shouldn't be telling anybody what kind of guy you are. The what kind of guy you are is this, that whole scenario. It's the dry brain commenting on its struggle with and its losses to the wet one. That's it. I just covered it. Of course, if you knew what was going on, you'd realize that most of what you say is a form of what kind of guy I am. So I have just covered a substantial part, a very substantial part of your 65 or 70 years worth of contributions to the verbal garbage, the verbal community of man. Is the dry brain commenting, continuing commentary on its struggles with and its losses to, which are two different things, the wet brain. So I tell you the kind of guy I am, assuming what I'm going to jump in here was germane to some subject going on between two people. Another person said, well, all right, I know what you're talking about. I tell you the kind of guy I am, though. I don't know. I'm probably too trusting for my own good, because I'll normally give people the benefit of the doubt, and I got to admit, a lot of times I shouldn't have. I get taken a lot, but you know, that's the kind of guy I am. What are they saying? Forget all that. You know what they're saying? They're commenting on, not in that particular example, not only their struggle, apparent struggle with the wet brain, but they're commenting on, I lost again. Which is a real magnanimous admission to admit that, well, my genes got the best of me. What a guy, what a guy. Or, it continually goes on, that it's not a direct commentary on a loss. It's a commentary on the struggle, which seems ultra civilized. And so on to say, I'll jump in again arbitrarily here at the sentence to we've been talking, and one guy says, well, I know what you're talking about. And I got to admit, I don't know what it is, I've got a bad temper myself. Well, I know you wouldn't believe it by looking at me now, but I do. I don't get in many fights. It's, you know, maybe college or once after college. The last time I actually got in a fist fight somewhere. But I'll be on the expressway. And you know, car will come too close, or somebody go by playing the radio too loud. Now I'm sitting there trying to think about what the next sales presentation I got. I just have these spurts. They just flash through me all the time of I could almost kill somebody. Not really, but you know, get mad or holler, you know, hey, get out of my way, and that kind of stuff. And it's a running battle, but you know, what are you going to do? You can't let that kind of stuff drive you nuts, and you can't go through life being that crude, especially in sales like I am. So, you know, that's the kind of guy I am. What they're saying is that's the kind of inner struggle I got between the dry and the wet brain. Whenever you're talking about, well, I'll tell you the kind of guy I am. That's what you're commenting on, is either the struggle, and you can see surely how they can overlap. I say that rather than using and or, which is, overlap is better if you begin to see it because it is more complex. But it is a continuing commentary within, I'll tell you the kind of guy I am, a commentary by the dry brain, which is of course the only verbal one you got, on its apparent struggles between it and this damn runaway train. This uncouth relative to which it is handcuffed. It's the continuing commentary on the struggle between me and you know who. and or the commentary on my losses to it. Which, of course, if there seems to be a loss, it's always a loss. When it seems to be victorious, as a somewhat of an aside, some of you ought to be able to plug this in yourself, it is always provisional. Such as somebody walks up, two people, and somebody walks up, my God, I hadn't seen you in months. Yeah, how you doing? Jesus Christ, how much weight have you lost? 30 pounds. How'd you do it? Well, blah, 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 blah. So the dry brain is saying what it did. But notice this. It'll end up saying what kind of guy I am. That, well, you know, I did it, but you know, I've done this before. I just hope this time I can keep it down longer than 2 weeks. Have you actually quit drinking? I mean, you used to put it away pretty good. Yeah, I know. Not gonna, you know, it's been 3 months since I had a drink. I was about to kill myself. If apparently the dry brain has won some skirmish with the wet one, that is its own genes, it is always expressed overtly or indirectly as a provisional claim of a temporary one-upmanship. Yeah, I got the weight down. I quit drinking, but you know, who knows? I'm proud that you didn't, that guy that bumped into you, I'm proud that you didn't jump out and start a fight. Yeah, I know. I was that close, though. If there hadn't been so many people around, if I hadn't seen that cop car come, I believe I would have taken a damn jack to his windshield, if not his head. The what kind of guy I am, dynamic, is by and large the dry brain commenting on the struggle between it and its silent, uncouth relative, or it's commenting on its loss. But what is not recognized, it is commenting, enough of you heard the example before, quite directly on its loss. Well, you know, yeah. Person sees the other one 6 months later. How you doing? Well, I see you put the weight back on. God, did I? Not even the 30 pounds. I put back on 40. Lost 30, put on 40. And you may say, God, I know what you mean. Shit, it gets harder and harder. All right, they are commenting. What they're commenting on is, I cannot fight, evidently, a once and for all winning battle against my own genetic, in this case, metabolic makeup. There it is. You can see it. But now back to a few paragraphs ago this evening. I was pointing out that in another way, such as, remember the example of banks saying that money is not, that there's more to banking than money. That is, of saying that the true essential purpose of what's going on is not what's actually going on. Not what everybody would think is going on. That is, the dry brain saying that the kinds of things that happen to me are caused by circumstance. It's not me wanting to do it. In other words, you are continually saying both. That you are saying, I'm not genetically made up to be hostile. I'm not antisocial. I don't have this terrible temper just because, because I want to, or I wasn't born this way. This is not actually me. Now, I know sometimes I appear to be this way, but and people who do not use terms about unconscious mind or circumstance or environment, just barely literate people, will still say, this is not me. This is not the me. This is something, spirits are making me do it, if we were talking about even a more primitive time and place. But what they're saying is that in some way the circumstances of life have made me this way, under these conditions. It brings it up, the stimuli does it to me, so you're continually saying that. But you're also continually commenting just the opposite. Because every time you say, I have lost, I know sometimes you think I'm antisocial. And I know I say I'm not. It's just, You know, sometimes you can be and sometimes you can't. And other people, if they're friends, they go, yeah, I know what you mean. Sometimes you can almost go on a spree and cut down on your food and almost get a handle on overeating. Yeah, no. And then again, I don't know what the hell happens. I don't know. It must be the pressure of life. Every time I seem to put on weight, it seems like that my social life is not real good. So it got to be something in my childhood. I don't know what it is. My mother used to say that when she was a kid, when she didn't have a boyfriend she used to eat, or when my father, her first husband, left, she said that she put on 20 pounds. You know, it must be something like that. You know, what they're saying is my own genetic makeup is doing this. That is my wet brain. But do you hear they are simultaneously saying it's not? Well, you're going to have to try and remember it, or we're going to run out of tape if I keep pushing this tonight. Life is generally wired up on this planet in such a way, you should know this by now, I've hit it and pointed your head toward it in all sorts of manners in the past. It's wired up in such a way that people in general are not supposed to, and they do not at all, have any firm line of sight, awareness, even any grave continuing suspicion past a split second, that basically what I am is unchangeable. What's that, some kind of old Greek philosophy? Now, that's a pretty cheap cop-out. Because people are responsible, don't give me that. You can't help perhaps being 5'2", but you can help being 400 pounds and real testy. You can help that. All of you have got to by now have some little passing sight of the fact that ordinary people, including yourselves at the ordinary level, could not go around with a feeling that, wait, suddenly I realize that everything I've ever said to myself, all the curses, all the promises, all the good intentions that I have hurled toward my own self, which was my own wet genetic makeup, were futile. I have not changed my genetic makeup. No one ever has that I've ever seen. One iota. But you do understand that no ordinary person can see that. I do admit, as I was pointing out for another purpose a few nights back, that life periodically, such things as that little spate of interest in the books on sociobiology, as it was called this time around. But you realize that almost everything that humans do individually and collectively could be explained as the need for man's own genes to keep themselves going regardless of what he thinks is going on? That life, including human intelligence, is microbiotic? And a few people went, wow, damn if that couldn't be true. What's for supper? That's it. It's not because they're dumb, but things are not arranged for large numbers of people. Ha ha. To suddenly, if that were true, that just as some of these ordinary people that wrote the books that coined the term sociobiology, so look, you could explain everything from love, altruism, religion. You could explain it as the unconscious, unthinking, unintelligent, microbiotic basis of life. Not only life in possums, but in people. That it's the genes themselves trying to survive, and it comes out in all these kind of rococo manners of us having a family life and caring and loving. Even the person who said it wrote it. The publisher said, well, I'll publish that. And several people went, wow, what a great idea. And then a few months later, the whole academic establishment fell down on his head. And if you found out whoever coined the term now and asked him about it, he'd probably want to punch you in the mouth. But, well, they took it. You know, I didn't say it was absolutely true. Damn, they got all excited. I just said that, you know, it was interesting. It was an idea. That it's like life sends out these trial balloons. Could I stand to know that via man right now? It doesn't take but just a second in lifetime, trust me, and it goes, nah. Down here it may take 10 years, 2 or 3 years. The kind of guy you are, Talk, is tied directly in a sense, it's not the purpose, but in a sense it's tied directly to making sure that people do not see. Because to say what kind of guy you are in a non-crude, in a non-hostile manner, as you must to say what kind of guy you are, what you're doing is supremely, smashingly so, whistling in your own dark. In a sense, if we were crude, three-dimensional cynics, we'd say that the announcement, the activities of, I'll tell you what kind of guy I am, is to say what kind of guy you're not. Or put another way, to say, I'll tell you the kind of guy I am, is to say, listen to this bunch of bullshit. I'm going to tell you exactly the kind of guy that I am not. I'm going to tell you the kind of guy I wish I was. I'm going to tell you the kind of guy that I dreamed I was. Which doesn't tell you anything, because that's not what's going on. I'm just trying to give you another crude way that before you can put your foot up on some real nice little angel step, at least you can jump with both feet into the slop and make some kind of noise. If you got to start somewhere, start there. Because the what kind of guy I am talk, that spiel, has nothing to do with what kind of guy you are. That's not the purpose. And as I said, this is not the sole purpose, but one of the purposes is so that nobody actually turns around and says, while in the midst of telling what kind of guy you are, for somebody to suddenly look around and realize what kind of guy I am. Which may or may not have any relationship to your spiel about what kind of guy you are. Although you can always say there's some relationship between that point on a map that says Akron and actually being there in Ohio. You can say that, and I guess there is. But as long as you're talking about, well, what kind of guy I am, and remembering this, that whole commentary is always based upon, fueled by, unspecifiedly so, but fueled by the commentary of the struggle of the brain that's talking, the dry brain, the struggle between me and the wet brain. I'm commenting either on that or upon my losses to it. So you understand, to say what kind of guy I am, for one thing, just one way, is to keep you, if there was any danger, of actually seeing what kind of guy you are. Because what you're commenting on is what kind of guy I am, is not what kind of guy you are. All right. Well, if you like that so much, I can also point out to you that from a certain, even more complex view, if that was called for tonight, I was wrong. They were announcing the last train to Akron. I mean, Clarksville. I thought it was the three wise men, but it turns out it was only 3/4 of the monkeys. From a more complex view, you could see that all talk to oneself, all talk amongst people, is actually talk between the dry and the wet brain. I don't believe I've got much time or intention to go any further with that tonight or ever, because that just about tells you. But from one more complex view, all talk, regardless of all the examples and specifics I've used tonight, but that all talk. Think about it right quick. We got another quick left. Right. That all talk to yourself, everything you ever talk, or I guess some of you still want to think of it as thinking. But all the talk in you and all the talk between people. Anybody, between men and women, presidents, bankers, you and a banker, that all talk can be seen. The only reason it's going on is the talk is between the wet and the dry. That's actually the conversation. It's going on either in you between the wet and the dry, or if it's going on between you and somebody else, it's between the wet and the dry. And if I may pull you up from behind, could you see that the talk is always on the difference, concerning the difference, again, between the wet and the dry? All right, a few of you suspected something. I'll take it one step further. What if there is never any reason to talk unless it has to be, unless it is motivated solely, exclusively by the need to comment on the difference between the wet and the dry? What if no word has ever been spoken on this planet that did not fit that description? That there is nothing, no matter what you think of to say, no matter what you tried to make up, if it made any sense to you or anybody else, it was in some way a comment on the difference as far as you were wired up to think. There was a comment on the difference either in you or between you and somebody else or between two other people. You can't get away from it. Commenting on the difference between the wet and the dry brains, the wet and the dry areas, the areas of interest to the wet and the dry. That's it. That anything you say, I don't care whether it seems to be about economics, art, religion, love, politics, life, death, the weather. Pick up a couple of things from the last time we were taping. I told you that I was referring to brain smiles again, and I also referred you to the fact that at whatever seems to be the end at any particular time of whatever game, scenario, circumstances are going on, that the person that smiles at the end always wins. And I said it was not simply proverbially interesting, but it was materially important that you not let him get you down. Of course, not you've had 24 hours to think about it. If you did, of course you know that there is no them. When I say don't let them get you down, or don't let them get you down, there is no them. The them, and the way I was trying to point your attention, had to do with brain smiles and being the final victor in whatever appears to be an abrupt and isolated and artificial struggle, that you've got to be the winner. To say not to let them get you down and then to say there is no them, the reality behind the them, in my comment of do not let them get you down, the them is the potential energy loss position for you intellectually. It's a matter of you letting apparently the circumstances that trigger your own brain responses, is letting the circumstances trigger the brain responses that make you brain-wise more dry, more brittle, and more serious. Then the position between you apparently and whoever the them was, which is just an ephemeral, it's just them being clothed apparently as them. If they get you down, what got you down was you ended up in the position of energy loss. What brain smile amounts to is an energy win position. Is no matter what the circumstances seem to be, and the circumstances are such that it triggers in you, you're already wired up, it triggers in you that kind of production of neurotransmitters that make you angry, make you anything other than we classify as brain smiley, all right? Happiness. Anything other than that is going to turn on, that is, produce more of neurotransmitters that what it amounts to are brittle, they are dry, and they are serious. And within the relationship apparently of you and whatever it was that you apparently was in the struggle with, in this dance with, you end up in the energy lose position. It's not a matter of right or wrong. It's not a matter that the muggers go away and laugh at you. It's not a matter that there you are ready to go and testify and serious and upset, and that guy goes by in the pickup truck again, the one that was here Wednesday, that goes by and looks you up and down and goes, they did get you down if you end up in that stage, and it's up to you to feel like, well, that's a little dance right there. The muggers got me and left, which seemed to be the end of it. And I heard them go around the corner, and I was looking for a cop, and suddenly I heard them, I know it was them, laughing. I not only got robbed, I got laughed at. Or there I was waiting to go and testify some months later, sitting all dressed up, and this guy comes by in a pickup truck, looks out at me, looks me up and down, and there I am waiting to get across the courthouse, and he just looks at me for no reason. Never saw him before, and he looks at me and goes, all right, if you felt that was the end of, that was a scene, that was something that happened to you, that was circumstantial life. If you're serious, if you're anything other than brain smiley about it, then what it is between you and apparently the circumstance. If you're ordinary, of course, it was between you apparently and that guy or the muggers or somebody. You ended up in brain lose position, energy lose position. You've got to end up in energy win position. And it's not at their expense. But it can't be at your expense. It's where I left you with the saying you can't let them get you down. You can't. But it's not of them. Doesn't matter who it is. It's just all a puppet show. Doesn't matter who the muggers were. Doesn't matter where it happened. Doesn't matter who the guy was or the girl was or how old they were or what color they were or what religion they were or what kind of pickup truck they were driving that went it's just all irrelevant. Just like religions like to claim from their dry brains, except they don't know why. It's irrelevant. The only thing relevant is what happens to your brain chemistry. And with ordinary people, that's not even relevant. Well, it's not. Because it's not going to change. They can't do anything about it, so it's not relevant. They are what they are. If you're going to do this, it is relevant. And you got to see the possibility of where the pertinence of it could be affected. Because it's not. And you talking to you and saying, well, I'm not as upset as I thought I was. What you're doing is, what you're saying is, I'm not as upset as I am. Right. Well, who cares? And if you're ordinary, you could say, oh boy, is that some kind of self-delusion? I know you could call it that. But if you're trying to do this, it's worse than that. There are things worse than self-delusion. There's a planet, I think Kyrie was going to mention it sometime, but there's a planet where there are things worse and there are things that are inferior to the counterfeit. There are. And I got news for you. You got to be able to drag those kind of conditions down here to keep doing this. There are things worse than being mugged. There are things worse than being laughed at. You know what they are? Is you being mugged. Is you being laughed at. Is you saying, well, I'll tell you the kind of guy I am, when you're not telling you the kind of guy you are. But when you're telling yourself and somebody else, well, here's the kind of guy I wish I was. Here's the kind of guy I plan to be. Meaningless. Which is meaningless to say. You are stuck. You are cursing, all the way from cursing, shaking your fist at, to making promises, expressing your good intentions, praying to your own intractable genetic makeup. And you can do it forever. Everybody does do it forever. Forever comes a lot sooner to some people than they imagine. Are we on tape? There is a reality that many of you already know about that I mean by brain smile. But to take it starts out apparently the circumstantials of life that trigger these things in you. Ordinary people, everybody under ordinary circumstances will never change that. Part of believing you can, part of attempting to, part of it talking about is what I've been describing to you all night, that there is a chemical, a quite material basis for that. To understand that is always the trick, not good or bad, but to understand all the possibilities in 3 different directions. To know that, there's another possibility then. The possibility for now is that you got the weekend.